Hello again and very welcome to the chapter about tricks. What I mean by tricks? Well, mainly I'm thinking about using some smart tactical idea, an unexpected tactical sequence which will help our defensive task. We can base this trick on different tactical motives such as the trapped piece, double attack, discovered attack, and so on. It's important to understand that very often this trick features some kind of sacrifice, because this is why it's so surprising. That's its surprise value, so to speak, the unexpected part of the sequence. Let's have a look at some different cases, and I would like to start with one which I think is very telling for this topic. In this game, we have with the white pieces Marsodlu and playing black is Meshkovs. You can see that things really look gloomy for black. They're a pawn down, and white has a very strong passed pawn on c6. You can see that right now the rook on a7 is under an attack. We don't really want to take on d7. That would make things perhaps even worse for us, because this pawn would just be extremely strong, the pawn on the d file. At the same time, you can see that evidently we don't have time to take the pawn on c6 because simply our rook is hanging. And on top of it, you could even see that there is an additional tactical problem for us. You got it, also f7 is being attacked. So what a nightmare for black. However, there is some hope. One of the, what can I say, preconditions to be able to spot tricks is to see some kind of motive, tactical motive, something which would possibly trouble the opponent. And if we look very carefully, if we move away our vision from this part of the board, let's say, and we look a little further on the board, we can see that white has some kind of back rank weakness. We can see that the rook on e1 is undefended and the king is slightly exposed on the king side. So what do you think we could do about that? How could we exploit the situation? The first move is not so difficult. As a general piece of advice, always check forcing moves, no matter if you're winning or losing or better or worse. That always makes sense in a tactical battle. So that's what Meshkovs did here. He played rook a1, very good move, because it's one of the few moves which don't let white trade queens, which would have been excellent for white, of course, to trade queens and make the game a little safer for them. So now white must do something about their hanging rook on e1. At the same time, as you can see, we get some chances of attacking this pawn on c6. We are not attacked anymore by the bishop. So at this point, white played here rook takes a1. Had they tried to keep the d-file under control by bringing back the other rook, as you can see, now we are perfectly able to take on d1 and take on c6, and we would have no problems whatsoever. So in the game, of course, after rook a1, white took on a1 instead. Rook takes a1, rook takes a1, and white played here king h2. So you would say, what did we gain from this? Still, we have problems here. We would like to take on c6, but in that case, white will take on f7. This will be very dangerous for us. But look very carefully and you will see what black had prepared in this game. There is a little trick here. We're talking about the fact that we would like to take on c6, but without allowing white to take on f7. Could we somehow switch the move order? Perhaps a sacrifice could be involved. You got it. Not very difficult. Rook h1. Exactly. Very pretty move. I would say in general terms, as humans, we have a slight difficulty when we put a piece in the air, so to speak. If you imagine there was a piece on h1, for most of us, I think it comes more natural to take something. It's more natural like that. But to just sacrifice the rook in the air like this, it can sometimes be a bit difficult. But not for Meshkovs in this example. This is exactly what he played. And as you can see, if white takes back now, black will take on c6. This is the tactical motive involved, the fork or double attack. White gets back the rook with complete equality. So in the game, actually, white played here king g3 instead. Black continued to, we don't have so much we can do here. They continued with the rook g1 check. White, of course, doesn't want to step on the f-file due to queen takes c6, so they went back with the king, and black went back with the rook. I just wanted to single out also one little detail here. There is a difference between these two squares. You would say that it's probably the same thing, but that's not true, because if you put the rook on g2, it's funny, but what do you think would be white's best move? We're back on this topic of non-captures. King h1 would be very clever, and black would be in big difficulties. I think one of the difficulties here is simply that if you take the pawn, no matter at which point you take the pawn, white will take on f7. You can't go to h8 because they take on f8, and if they go to h7, if I'm not mistaken, white would give this check on f5 also. This would be troublesome for black. Yeah, as you can see, if we go back with the king, perhaps we could even trade queens here. Yeah, that would be a funny way to trap the rook on g2, right? Something like that. But I mean, even if it wasn't trapped, it would still be troublesome for black. This situation, white would take the pawn on b5 and so on. So anyway, this is not really part of the solution, so to speak. If we go back very quickly, we can see that black had big troubles, but they noticed a smart trick. Based on the vulnerability of white's king, they hurried to play here the move rook a1. Very clever. The big point, it's discovered after rook takes, king h2, and here the very pretty move rook a h1. That trick saved the day. It's important to be awake, to see such tactical ideas or look for them. They won't always work, but we really have to make an effort to try to find them. All right, let's continue. Let's see our next example. It's more about, you could say, using a different tactical motive here, but somehow connected to the previous one. Let's see if we understand this. We're playing with the white pieces. With white is Brouson and playing black dragon. You can see that black is up material. However, the knight on e5 is currently in big danger. It's pinned along the h2 b8 diagonal. We can't move it just like that because our queen would be hanging, right? So what do you think? How could we possibly save this knight? It would be ideal to defend it, of course, but rook e8, it's not available, the bishop is there. Knight f3, it's something that immediately strikes us now. Oh, that's a simple solution, but if you remember the chapter about the lifeline, of course you can see the next move here. White is definitely going to take that knight. Rook takes f3 because black has no time to take back since their queen is hanging, so they will have to take on g3, and here after rook takes g3, white's up material, and also it's a very unpleasant endgame. The bishop pair is very strong, so that doesn't really work. Just like in the previous example, this is about giving up material, temporary sacrifice, but we will get it back straight away. So that's what Drago noticed. He noticed perhaps the fact that this bishop is a little loose. I'm coming back to this all the time. Loose pieces, they are often subject to tactical ideas. And if you think about white taking the knight on e5 at some point with the bishop, for example, if you think away from the heavy pieces now and just look at the bishops, you can actually see that these will be placed on the same rank. So that's what the Polish grandmaster noticed here, that there is a tactical motive on the 5th rank. So he hurried to play here. Very nice move, rook c8. So what's going on? Well, it turns out that in the first place, we are defending the queen, so that now we're ready to move the knight. But his big idea here, of course, is that after white takes on e5, rook takes e5, rook takes e5, queen takes e5, black is ready to, you got it, queen takes e5, bishop takes e5, and rook c5, as simple as that. Black queens take change, and most likely the game as well. As you can see, they will soon be able to also bring in the king once they take one of the bishops. That's always useful in the endgame. So very clever move, rook c8. Of course, you could ask yourself, what if white takes with the bishop on e5 instead? Well, in that case, evidently what black will do, they will use a fork here to pick up the bishop on b5. They will play queen c5, and they get back the piece anyway, which means that, yeah, we can put the king somewhere, king g2 maybe, queen takes b5. Black will be winning because simply there they change up, and yeah, also white's king is starting to look a little exposed in this position. So very nice move, rook c8 here by black. I think it was also possible to go to d8, but it looks more natural, more pleasant to put the rook on c8 because, of course, because we protect the queen also. Let's have a very quick look at what happened in the game. I think he played something else in the game, right? What did he play in the game? He played queen h3 in the game. Brouson played queen h3. He saw this, of course, the tactical motive with rook c5 in the end, so he didn't want to enter that. He kept the queens on. Some chances here, maybe something like rook takes g5 and rook g7, something like that. But okay, that doesn't really work because we also have knight f3. Yeah, many things can happen here in the game. Black simply played g4, and after queen h5, knight f3, black had a big, big advantage. They can perhaps take on d4 at some moment. It seems that things are reasonably defended here. The queen is defending the pawn on f7 and so on. Rook g5 can perhaps Yeah, right now they can't even play rook d5 because knight is down. So that's what happened in the game. Anyway, these are small tactical details. Let's not drift away from the main topic here. Black will actually give up the knight on e5, but in the best possible way, playing rook c8 so that they are ready to pick up the piece after that, right, with the key move here, rook c5, hitting both bishops. Nice tactical thinking. All right, time for our next example. This is about double attack with a rook. In the previous one, we saw a double attack with a queen, if you remember, the queen on c6, attacking the king and the rook. Where was the rook in this example? On d7, right? And I mean in the previous example. And now we will see the knight in action. Of course, the knight is an expert of these tactical tricks, which we will see in this next example. Playing with the white pieces, Christopher Yu, and black is Le Quang Liem. If you look at this position, you will say, oh no, white is in big trouble here. They are a piece down, although it's true that they have 2 pawns for it. But also you can see that black's threatening to give mate in 1, and also the pawn on f4 is in the air. So let's check forcing moves here. Aha, you got it. Definitely knight h7 must be examined. If you look at this move knight h7, you can see that black's king doesn't have many choices. There are only 3 legal moves, and we can definitely not go to one of these squares due to the fork on f6, so king e7 is forced here. At this point, I remember using this position as an exercise. Some students wanted to play queen d5 here. I would say it's the most logical move, queen d5, because we defend against the mate and we hit the knight on b7. Unfortunately, black has a very nice sequence here, which I think Le Quang Liem had prepared. Queen takes f4, just giving up the knight on b7. After queen takes b7, we play bishop c7, and there is unfortunately no good way of defending against the threat of queen takes h2 mate. If white plays g3, what do you think black would play? That's right, we have a forced mate here. Rook takes h2, and after king takes h2, queen takes g3, king h1, queen h2. Nice teamwork by black's pieces. However, Christopher Yu noticed a very nice trick here. I told you it's about the knight, but right now the knight doesn't seem to be capable of any tricks. Perhaps because black's king is on the dark square. What do you think? Could be forced to a light square. Aha, that's what happened in the game. He played here queen f6, and as you can see, after king d7, now we have this situation where black's king and queen are located at the distance of a knight. So if the white queen could just move somewhere, we would be able to fork them, right? So how could we possibly do that? Of course, we're not interested in taking this pawn, because in that case, black's king would run away. So instead, it's much smarter, yes, to take on d6. This is what he played in the game. Very, very nice. So that after knight takes d6, we're down the queen, but not for long. We have now knight f6 check. And after that, king e6, we pick up the queen on g4. Black can take a pawn on b2, but we will still be up a pawn here if they take on b2, for example. We have a passed pawn that we can slowly start to see how we can use it. It's definitely white who's playing for a win. This is definitely the best outcome from the original situation. So very nice opportunistic play by Yu in this case. Knight h7, that's not a difficult move to see. However, what we have to spot here is the tactical trick based on this fork on f6, right? Queen f6. I wonder if he played king e8. I guess it would be basically the same thing, right? Maybe in that case we could give the check on h8 also. They cannot go this way, they would have to go that way, and maybe we can use... I think this must be the conclusion, yeah? Queen f8 check. That seems very promising, because if the king goes there again, we have knight f6, and if the king goes up, of course, we can now use a different tactical idea here. Queen c8, and we pick up the queen. So yeah, that didn't happen in the game. After queen f6 check, Le played king d7, and here Yu uncorked this very nice trick, noticing that the king and queen are of the knights on the knight's distance, and he played here queen takes d6, followed by knight f6. Beautiful. That's the kind of move that makes you feel really well as a chess player. Let's move on. Our next example, it's actually again about a fork or double attack. I would say this is the most common motive perhaps in the context of a tactical trick. So let's get to grips with this position. You can see that white is up, white is down the pawn, but they have a very nice attack coming up here. Look at that bishop, fantastic bishop along the long diagonal, and at the same time the other bishop is ready to take on d5 at some point. which means that black's king is in big danger. Not to be forgotten, there is some idea with queen d4 and trying to give check on h8. So not in an easy case for black in this case. We have with the white pieces Fedoseev and playing black is Vidit. This was a blitz game, so you can definitely not expect perfect play from both players. And here Vidit had a bad moment, unfortunately. He played at this point bishop c5. This means preventing queen d4 and also attacking f2. However, Fedoseev hurried to play queen e5. Now getting on with the attack, there is the threat of mate in 2. Vidit took on f2, but after king h1, bishop takes e1. The first thing that pops up to us is to give check on h8 and king f7, queen g7 and so on, but Fedoseev knew he had that in the pocket, and exactly, he started with rook takes e1, much smarter, and as you can see, there was nothing black could do to stop this mate. It's completely impossible. Queen and bishop, that's a very nice battery on the long diagonal. However, there was a solution here. There was a solution, I was saying, for black, but it's very difficult, especially if you're in time travel. So you really have to check the different candidate moves here. Maybe you can use a little also the process of elimination. We can't simply allow them to place the queen on the long diagonal. We have to stop that. So there is one move which stops this idea from white, which denies the white queen of these two squares. That's right, c5. Of course, he didn't play this in the game with it because he saw that white would take on d5. After knight takes, queen takes, he noticed that if he blocks with the rook, well, he will lose the other rook. So it looks like black is completely lost here. However, if you look carefully, you will notice the little trick. Aha. We are looking very much at this side of the board, I would say, but it's important for us to look a little further. And we would notice that actually, again, I'm boring you with this topic. Again, we have an undefended piece in the opponent's camp. We could exploit this situation. How? Exactly, queen f7, so that after queen takes d6, else it's just an endgame, equal endgame, queen takes d6, we take on f2, and we take on, after king h1, we take on b2 as well. White will then take on c5 probably, but it will be an equal position here. If white takes on c5, it's completely equal. So very dramatic solution, incredible, but true. Black could actually escape this difficult situation, but here again you have the practical element of chess. Such a position as this, okay, if your opponent is able to find all the right moves, they probably deserve a draw, right? The engine will say 0, 0, 0, things like that. But we all know that when we're sitting there and sweating in this kind of position with black, it's very difficult. So chess is a sport also, let's not forget about that. It's not like Fedoseev was bluffing or anything. He just made it difficult for his opponent to find the right choices here. So very important to see this tactical motive. I think we can find it perhaps by using elimination. Everything else loses. We should look a little further. There is also a good saying that after c5, bishop takes, knight takes, and queen f7, there is a good saying, try to look a little beyond what you see in the first place. So don't stop here, please. Don't stop just saying, I'm lost. Look a little further. I mean, before, when you're sitting there calculating, I mean, you have to look a little further and you will notice that, oh, fantastic, I can actually take on b2. So that's perhaps the unexpected part of all this. All right, we will continue. In our next example, the tactical trick that I'm referring to actually didn't take place because the players didn't arrive at this position. It's a game between Grisuk with the white pieces and Aronian playing black. In the Ruy Lopez, they never arrived at this position, but I was curious about it because Grisuk could have brought up this position on the board. Last move would be here, bishop f4. I thought it was interesting because you can see what's going on here. If black moves the rook somewhere, white will then play e5. It's important for white to play this move before black gets d6 in. So if you just play something random like rook e8, white will definitely play e5, and the knight has no good square. This would be disastrous for black. So obviously the only critical move here would be rook takes e4. But once you look at rook takes e4, you will say, but hey, what's going on here? There is another rook here on a8. Isn't there some typical tactical trick in the Ruy Lopez where the pieces get pinned or forked along the h1, a8 diagonal? Exactly, the queen can come to d5. So the first thing that you will have to look at here is if rook takes e4, rook takes, knight takes, White would have two pieces that they could put on d5, right? In that situation, after rook takes e4, rook takes e4, knight takes e4, white could put two different pieces on d5. Well, if they put the bishop there, they would indeed be forking the knight and the rook. But as you can see, black would probably be able to play an attacking move themselves. They could play knight f2 probably. And they're hitting the queen on d1 also. But more serious, if you look at this again, rook takes e4, rook takes e4, knight takes e4, would be queen d5. So that's what we're talking about. Do you think we can enter this variation? Is there any possible way out, or is this a bad idea? Well, I think you have to know a little about Ruy Lopez. I didn't really know about this specific trick before I saw this game, so it was new for me also. Let's have a look at what could have happened here. Black must take on e4, and after rook takes, knight takes, queen d5. Sorry, it's actually very unpleasant at first sight. The rook is hanging, the knight is hanging, sorry, and also the pawn is hanging on f7. Although this is not that dangerous. Again, don't see any ghosts. We don't get mated because they take that pawn. They need more pieces for that, and you can see that still white needs a few tempi to bring their pieces in. So what do you think? What should we do about the rook then? And here comes the very nice trick. We will actually give up a piece here to trap white's queen. That's the idea. In order to save black in this position, we should play here the move bishop b7. Very unexpected. I have seen it a few times, but there is a trap in the Fajerovic gambit. If you know the Budapest gambit, like d4, knight f6, c4, e5, d takes e4, knight e4. There is a variation like that. Yeah, you can check it. In some line, white goes queen d5 and they take a rook on a8. But then we can play knight c6, I think, and we trap the queen there. So there is something like that in opening theory. More than one case, by the way. But anyway, this is connected to that. Queen takes b7. Yeah, we talked about this. It's not very dangerous. We would just move away our queen. We're better developed. So white should, of course, take on b7. And here, which would be black's next move? Do we need to take on f2 or should we do something else? Yeah, don't take on f2, please, because we have that move in the pocket. We can take that later. But if you really want to trap white's queen, we should make sure that it doesn't return from where it came. So, of course, we should play here the move c6. It's easy to understand now why the knight stayed, because it would like to go to c5 next turn, right? And you can also see that on some occasions, we could try to take the queen in this way. However, there is also an idea for white. They could try to play queen b8. So we have to be careful, and in the first place, let's see how white parries the threat of knight c5. So not easy for white. I think that if they put the bishop on e3, in this case, I think you could take and you could play knight c5, right? You would take and you would play knight c5, if I'm not mistaken, and the queen is safely trapped on b7. So main line here will be knight d2 instead. White is trying to quickly bring in their pieces, and black has at least two different approaches here. One would be to just play knight c5. White could then use an intermediate move to limit the damage here. They could play the move bishop g5, so that black's queen would have to lose track of either the bishop or the rook, unless they want to go for the endgame, which would be the best choice for black here. Exactly, simply take on b7, and black would be a healthy pawn up here. So this is already a very nice outcome, of course, an extra pawn in the endgame. On the other hand, we can also take first on f2, and after king h1, we can take on d2, and we can use the other trick now. Knight takes d2, bishop takes d2, and in order to trap white's queen, you got it. We should now use the rook. There is not any other piece really to trap it. So rook a7, of course, keeping track of the pawn. White would have to use the same trick again, bishop g5, but in this case, since we don't have to look after a piece on b6, we can simply play here queen e8, and as you can see, unfortunately for white, their queen is again doomed. So this was the answer to this little mystery. Why didn't Grischuk play like this? Wasn't this a very promising idea for white? It wasn't actually, because black would take on e4, they didn't have much choice actually, and here they would use this very nice little trick, bishop b7. That's an unexpected move, at least if you ask me. The point being that after queen takes b7, we would play c6, and we would later on pick up the white queen by knight c5 or perhaps rook a7. All right, let's continue. If this was simple, wait until you see the next example. This one is really mind-boggling. This example is very, very interesting. And just look at the initial position here. in this game between Sanal with white and Suleimanli playing black. White has just played, I think, queen takes d3, I was going to say. No, I'm wrong. White has just played rook e7. So what on earth is going on here? Material is about equal. Well, black has 2 extra pawns, but of course what's important here is the safety of black's king. You can see that white just went for the beauty prize, you could say, in this game, because they are attacking they are giving away the queen. They are about to mate black with this pretty mate knight f7, right? I guess you can also mate them with rook e8 if you like. So 2 different mates that we could use here, but this one is perhaps prettier. In any case, yeah, not relevant. How should black cope with this situation? Yeah, we can't evidently take the rook because the knight is pinned, no? So how can we get out of this difficult situation? White would like to take next turn and mate us in the way that we just noticed here. Not easy at all. What's black's hope here? Well, one of the hopes you can see from a general tactical perspective is that there are 2 knights on the same file. So we should have that in the backbone. Maybe in some variation, some distant variation, we can exploit this situation. So let's see what we can do here. In the game, black played queen a1. I think I would have played the same move if I was sitting there, because we're winning a tempo by moving away the queen. Unfortunately, after king h2, again, it's very dangerous for black, this situation. They played in the game f5 so as to limit the white queen. I think else there were some tricks here coming up, not some threats I was going to say. Knight e8 I think is one important threat here, attacking g7 and so on. So they played in the game f5, and here white had a very pretty way to win the game. They should have tried to deflect the black queen from a1. The black queen is evidently controlling the square on f6. They should try to deflect her from that diagonal. How can that be done? Starting with a queen sacrifice again. Black cannot take the queen in that case. If they take the queen, they get mated here, as you can see. The same idea. So they would have to stay on the long diagonal. They would have to play queen b2, and now we can play queen e2. Whenever the computer is telling you moves, go here, go there, and so on, it's important to try to understand what happened. Why does the computer want to play like that? So I think I understood this. The computer, in the end, if black now stays, we will play here the move knight e8. And the point is that since we brought our queen to e2, we can now take back on e7. Black on their turn, they played f5 so that the knight would be unpinned and they would like to take here, but white would then take back. That's why we need to maneuver the queen to e2 so we can take back on e7. And here, as you can see, even if material favors black, they have no good defense against the threat of knight f6 check and queen takes g7 mate. So this is what could have happened perhaps if 2 computers were playing each other, but it's of course hard for the human to see all this. In the game, black played queen a1 and later on the game was a draw, but as we saw here, after king h2, f5, white had this very pretty maneuver. Right now black is about to take the rook, but if we include this move queen d1, we are forcing them to move the queen. I think there is not a big difference. Yeah, you cannot trade queens, by the way, in that case. Evidently, I'm giving the same mate here, so you have to stay with queen b2, and then we would play here queen e2, as we were saying. And I think, again, it's the same thing. If you play queen d4, we can play here knight e8, believe it or not. This is very, very strong for white. Is that so? Queen e4. And you can't play queen h, but you could play queen h4, right? This seems interesting. Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure what happens here. King g1, and you could then take on e7. This doesn't seem to work out for white. Yeah, maybe not so clear. Or could you attack this pawn and mate them? Something like queen e5. Is that the point here? Or g3? G3 is another move. g3, queen g5. Wow. Yeah, very confusing. Yeah, I can't really tell what's going on here. Queen e5 looks interesting also to attack this pawn. Yeah, very complex variations. Queen d4, maybe that was also possible. Yeah, in any case, hard to see all these variations at the board. That's definitely a big challenge here. But there was, yeah, I'm still puzzled by this little situation. Yeah, I hope I can come back to that at some moment, what will happen after queen d4. In any case, what black could have done instead, in order to avoid all these complex calculations, they had a much simpler task here. What we have to do, just like in some of the previous examples, we have to give back something. We give up something, give up a piece here. So if you notice that there is this motif of the two knights on the same file, we should bring a rook quickly to d8, no matter the loss of a piece. So you got it, bishop e6. This was the right move. It's actually much simpler than the other variation that we looked at. You can see here the point. White will first have to take the queen, and after pawn takes, knight takes f6, it's not really that powerful anymore. We just play king h8. We don't get mated anymore because our rook is controlling this square and our bishop is controlling the other square. So this would just be complex for white. They could take on e6, but we take back and we have at least material equality here. After rook takes king g7, black would be okay. 3 pawns versus 3, so to speak. So rook takes e6 should be checked, of course, and here you got it, of course, we play rook d8. It's not really a skewer in itself or a pin in itself, but it's connected also to the deflection motif, because if this knight goes away, we could use the knight to deflect White's rook from the defense of the knight, and at the same time you can see that we have a passed pawn which is about to run. So if they play something like knight b4, it's true that after knight f8 they could go rook e8, trying to maintain the material balance. However, after rook takes d6, rook takes f8, you can guess black's next move, right? Of course, we have this pawn to run with d3, and white will have to sack the knight evidently here in order to be able to stop that pawn. So black is okay here in this position. They have plenty of activity. So after rook d8, white could play king f1 instead, and we will continue in the same fashion. Knight f8. Yeah, don't go to f4, I think, because... Oh, you can't go to f4, sorry, the knight is there. So knight f4, yeah, exactly, not working. Knight f8, correct choice. White will have to give back something here. Knight takes f6. We could take on f6 straight away, but even nicer is to play this unexpected move. Wow, look how many white pieces are in danger now. So in this way we're pretending to take perhaps the other knight instead. White could play rook e8 here, and after rook takes d8, everything, I think it evaporates into a drawn endgame. Knight e4, rook e6, rook takes f4, rook takes f8, and rook takes e4. Yeah, even I would take black here, of course, in this endgame, but probably white can get to grips with this pawn in some way, maybe put the rook here and play f3 or something like that. So they would probably make a draw here anyway, but it's a good result for us because they were virtually killing us here in this initial position. So very interesting, very unexpected solution. Bishop e6, that was a difficult move to see for the Azerbaijan grandmaster. Bishop e6, very difficult, but it's something we can learn from, no? Seeing the vulnerability of the pieces. In this case, we see the vulnerability of white's knights on the d5, d6, on this d file. That's something that we should be able to spot, or at least consider in our calculations. All right, let's have a look at our next example. It's more about deflection. Just like here, we have a deflection motive. In our next example, we will see something similar. In this game with the white pieces, Hakobian and playing black Bag Sujog. Black has just played here rook. What did they just play? Oh, bishop takes g3 they just played. Yeah, very nice move. You would say that black, in this French-like structure, they have almost all their pieces in the attack. So it's natural that they will try to attack white in some way. Let's see if we understand this sacrifice. If white takes, that's of course the first thing we should check. If rook takes, I guess white could play king h2, but much stronger, exploiting the pin along the g1, a7 diagonal. Rook takes e3, you got it. So that after rook takes e3, we have knight f5, and black gets back the rook with interest. So it's good that we check f takes g3. The acceptance of the sacrifice should always be checked, but it doesn't seem healthy for white on this occasion. We can check some other moves. Bishop takes d4, doesn't make big sense here. Black will take with the queen, and again we have a problem here with the pawn hanging on f2. So difficult for white. And I would definitely say that the best move here is really unexpected. We talked about the fact that it's easier to take pieces when you sacrifice than to just move them into the air, so to speak, to empty squares. But that's what the Armenian grandmaster did here. He noticed some kind of dependency in black's position. He saw that in the first place, the rook on f3, it needs some support. It's supported by the rook, and it's also supported by the knight. The knight is supported by the queen, but the knight cannot move because in that case the queen falls. So Black has some things, it's a little shaky, their position. If we somehow could manage to, for example, deflect the black rook from the f file, it would give us some ideas like, for instance, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, and then we could take on f3 if the rook was not there. I mean, you could even imagine, I mean, let's just imagine for a moment that black's king was on h8. Well, in that case, you could even figure out a tactical idea based on the black rank motive, right? We could in that case, if the king was there, yeah, maybe we can play it out. Let's just play a funny move, just for fun, to see what happens. So we could play something like this, queen takes, and you got it. The rook would be undermined here, so we could play queen takes f3, and we would mate them. So, but okay, this is just like a fantasy variation, but I just wanted to show you that there are these ideas. We can't do it in the game because, in that case, after bishop takes, rook takes, rook c8, black could then go back with the rook, right? But it's good to see this idea. So what white did in the game, he did it the other way around. He played first rook c8, very clever, and definitely only move here, rook c8. It doesn't win the game, it just puts up more resistance in this difficult position, rook c8. So, all right, let's see what happened here. Black took back on c8, and white carried out their idea here. Bishop takes d4, queen takes, and queen takes f3. You can see that by now material favors black. There are 2 pawns up still. However, white has a lot of activity, and their king is safe. That's very important for us. But speaking of activity, you can see that there is a check on f7. There is some motive with rook takes and rook e8 and so on. So black should be a little careful. It seems that here they made a bad choice, but the next move was not easy for anyone. They should have played here, believe it or not, bishop takes f2. Strange. Why would they give back a material like that? Why sacrifice the bishop? Well, in order to avoid what happened in the game. This buys them time so that after knight takes f2, yeah, if you take with the queen, black would take, and queen f7, king h8, black would be okay. So knight takes f2, and the next move, of course, activity, we play rook f8. This would be the outcome here, queen somewhere close to the knight. Let's say we go to g3, black would take this pawn on b2, and you have a, what can I say, chaotic position. Material is about equal, and black's king is reasonably safe. I think they shouldn't lose this game, but white should also not lose. Probably a draw is the most likely outcome here. So this is what they should have played in the game, but I perfectly understand black in this case. They didn't want to give away the bishop like that, and they played bishop b8. But unfortunately now white is able to take the initiative. It's now white who will play for mate here, for an attack. So in the game, they took on e6, rook takes e6. It's a good move also. After rook f8, white uncorked the nice little trick. Rook e8, as you can see, black cannot take, because in that case, there is mate coming up. So black played in the game queen f6. White took on d5. By now, white has managed to get back the material. It's equal material. And after king h8, white could even take another pawn here. Rook takes b7, and they went on to win this endgame with an extra pawn. But it was, I think it was something like that, or similar to this, the game. But even more clear-cut would have been, after bishop e8, even more clear-cut would have been to give check first, and after king h8, take on e6. I guess this was not so easy for white to see during the game, because, yeah, it was move 30 or so. Black has a bunch of checks here, but they're actually not dangerous. There is one thing I wanted to share also. I think we talked about it. King and knight close to each other. It's a very good defensive construction. So after queen g4 check, king f1, please notice that our knight prevents the check on c1, queen d1. White could avoid the perpetual by playing here knight e1. Very good defensive construction. It's difficult to get at white's king now, and at the same time you can see that rook e8 is hanging over black. If they play something like queen a4, we will still have chances here of playing like maybe b3, and yeah, they give check and we move the king somewhere, let's say to g2 maybe. We will still have a clear initiative in this position. a4 would be threatening, perhaps rook e7 is another idea, threatening mate and so on. So this would be dangerous for black. This was a good option also. Never mind, these are small details. The big thing here in this example is that we're able to spot this tricky move, rook c8. I think that if it was a bishop on c8, this move would come more natural for most of us, but to just move it like that, rook c8 into nothing, I think that's tricky for most of us. So it's important to be able to spot this kind of unexpected tactical ideas. In this case, what white is doing here, they're trying to deflect black's queen from the defense of the rook on f3, so that after rook takes c8, they can take on d4 and finally take on f3, as we just saw. And this would mean that their king would be a little safer. All right, time to move on. In our next example, we have, wow, this is an interesting example. When I looked at this, I still have difficulties understanding it, because if I look at it, my old school chess formation just says black must be much better here. All the pieces in the battle, white's underdeveloped, the queen is exposed, but okay, we learn with computers. I learned something from this example. Actually, white is much better here, but it all comes down to a little tactical detail. So I would start by asking you something. If it's black to play here, do you think that knight b3 wins material? If white just plays any move, like let's say h3, let's say I play h3 here, would knight b3 win material, or it would not win material? What do you think? Does white have some trick there? You're right, they have a very nice trick here. If knight b3, white is going to use, I mean, black is trying to do some kind of discovered attack, right? But white can do the same thing. They can play knight a4. Why do I say discovered attack? Well, it's a small discovered attack. We want to take on b3 next turn. Since we're hitting black's queen, if they take our queen, we will take their queen, and so on. Interesting. In this case, you can see there are still some tactical difficulties, but at least 3 black pieces are hanging right now, right? The knight can be taken in 2 ways, the rook can be taken in 2 ways, and the rook on c8 can be taken in 2 ways as well. So white should be okay here, even if their rook falls off, right? What does this mean? That probably h3 is definitely not a good move. I'm just using it as an example to see black's potential here. Knight b3 is probably not a threat. So what black would really like to do before playing knight b3, they would like to move away the queen, so that white doesn't have their trick, knight a4. So if we go back to this silly move h3, black would play something like, let's see, we have to move the queen. Let's do it in some clever way, like move it away but threaten something. Aha! Something like queen e6. I think this is what black would play. And if now white moves their knight, you can see that now, in effect, knight b3 is winning the game, because there is no equivalent discovered attack of any kind, and the rook is falling. So once white noticed in this game between Moussard with the white pieces and Romanov playing black, once white noticed that knight b3 was not a threat, you know what they did? They actually induced black into playing knight b3. They played knight f3. I thought this was very nice. Knight f3, the computer is very happy about this move also. You can see what white is aiming at here is simply making black play knight b3, now that the queen is still on b6. If black plays something else, of course, if you move the knight, you can move it to many places, but if you move it somewhere else, I can just move my queen somewhere. I don't know, queen here maybe, play d3. After all, white is 2 pawns up, so they're happy to just play it slowly. Not easy to see a good alternative for black here to knight b3. Bishop c5 is another move that you could try, of course, to put some more pressure, but white could take. They could put the queen on f3, where it protects a little, controls black's knight. At some point they will try to bring out the pieces, d3. Maybe a pawn will fall on c3 and so on, but they don't really care, because they have 2 pawns, 2 extra pawns already. So very, very nice move, knight f3. Now let's check, of course, the main line. That's the most critical line, knight b3. What happens here? Well, you know the next move, of course. White uses their clever trick, knight a4. Black, if they move the queen, obviously we take on b3 with the knight, saving our queen. So black took in the game on d3, black took on b6, and the situation that we talked about, there are at least 3 hanging pieces in black's camp. Black would like to play here rook takes c2. This had like good prognostic, this move, since after 8 takes b3, 8 takes b6, black would still have nice pressure in the endgame. Unfortunately, there is a heartbreaker here. You got it, knight e1, and yeah, what a pity for black, but that's the cruel nature of this game. Tactics rule, right? We have to see the tactics, unfortunately. We cannot just consider everything in general terms. So knight a4, very good move. Black played rook takes, knight takes b6, and they just took back, I think, on b6, and yeah, white took back on b3 with the a-pawn, so that the rook is opened at the same time we're hitting the rook on c2. So yeah, we saw this trick already with knight e1, so black played here rook takes f3, giving up the chance to ruin white's pawn structure, but since we're already in the endgame after g takes f3, rook takes e2, white played here rook a7, I think, and yeah, it was not enough for black, the compensation here, since queens are off. Material was decisive of white's part, the extra exchange and so on, just bring out the pieces and so on. Interesting example, very deceiving, I must say. If I look at this position, I still can't understand that actually white is better here, but yeah, that's how some positions work. Sometimes we have to be a little materialistic. It was okay for white to take those 2 pawns, but you have to see through this threat, knight f3, and if knight b3, knight a4. Important to see this idea. All right, time to move on. In our next example, it's about intermediate moves. It's a very tricky example. Let's see if we understand this. White sacrificed the exchange. Right now, they are hitting the pawn on f7. They're also hitting the rook on d7. We cannot take on g6 because they take back and they have a fork against king and queen. What to do with black? Tricky position. You would say, all right, I know what to do here. I'll play rook f8, the last friend to the party. But then white has a nice little trick here, tactical trick. That's right, removing the defender, or what you would call it. What do you call that? Clearance, perhaps. You clear the square for another one. Bishop takes f7, no matter what you call it. It's a good move because we have knight g6 coming up next here. So tricky position. Black played the best move here in this game between Friedman with white and Kuparadze with black. Kuparadze played here queen e8. Good move, removing the queen from the dangerous distance from the king. Now they can't be forked anymore. Bishop takes f7 is not a threat. White should have taken on d7. It was time for white to slow down a little and take on d7 and play this endgame. Rook d1, put the bishop on e4. Black would be okay. It would be a balanced endgame. Technically speaking, black has a better pawn structure due to these doubled pawns, but on the other hand, white commands the open file, so it would be a balanced battle. However, in the game after queen e8, white went for more, and that can be very dangerous. They played here the move queen a4. Looks great, doesn't it? Queen a4 looks very promising because we're hitting the rook. We would like them to move the rook so that we could take on e8 and take on f7. You can see that if rook e7, for example, this is what Friedman, of course, had analyzed, that he would have this killer move, knight takes f7. So that rook takes, queen takes, and black suffers heavily. Rook takes e8, bishop takes f7. They suffer on the light square. So far, white's calculations problem in this game after queen e8, queen a4. I think the same goes for rook d8. We will do the same thing here, knight takes f7, and if you take on f7, I take on e8, and I take in the end on f7 also, right? So, what do you think? Could you come up with some nice trick here? After all, white has a hanging bishop on g6. We would love to take this bishop, it's just that we don't want them to take on d7. This would be an ugly, you see what I mean, right? Pawn takes, queen takes d7 is an ugly endgame for black because the knight would come back to e5. This is another of white's what would you say, favorable panoramas in this game. They would love to enter that endgame with a stronghold on e5. So, queen e8, queen a4. Please do me a favor, tell me if there is any intermediate move in this position. Any intermediate move, something we could play before we take on g6. You remember from chapter 2, checks, captures, and threats. What might that be? We have a threat here. It's a move that doesn't come natural to us. That's why I'm saying it's a trick. It's an unexpected move. Kuparadze played here the very pretty move b5. This is, I would say, in my case, one of my favorite areas. I would do this as a kid also. I would find these strange moves, which can be very helpful in a tactical context. Let's see what's going on here. In the first place, white takes with the pawn. Evidently, the queen is not touching the rook anymore, so we could just take, and we are actually, we will be a piece up once white takes on d7. So that doesn't work for white. In the game, they took with the queen instead, and now you can see what happened. Now we're actually able to carry out another intermediate move. It's not difficult to see it because also our bishop is hanging, so you got it, there aren't many choices. c6, of course, now definitely we are attacking the queen, and we are making sure that the queen is not attacking d7 anymore, which means that we will pick up g6 next turn. It's difficult to see the good move for white. If they just play any queen move here, as I'm saying here, we will just take back and we are material up. So in the game, Friedman had to play bishop takes f7, trying to limit damage here. But yeah, black didn't lose their head here. They don't take because white would take, and it would be some tactical complexities. Black, of course, just took on f7 instead. You can see that after knight takes f7, queen takes f7, black is now material up. This is not what white wanted, definitely. Queen a5, you have many choices here, but as a general piece of advice, try to play as actively as possible. You can see that this pawn is hanging, and we can exploit that exactly. e5, that's what black played. White took on e5 with the queen. After queen takes e4, material is slightly favoring black, but somehow the nature of the position dictates that black is much better here. The bishop is much stronger than the 2 pawns. So black went on to win here. Yeah, the pawn is hanging, and you can bring in the rook like that. And who knows, maybe on one glorious day we can play c5 and open up for the bishop somehow. So that's what happened. Yeah, what a cold shower for white. They thought they played a very clever move here after queen e8. They thought they played a very clever move, but black had this very nice unexpected rejoinder prepared. b5, queen takes b5, c6. That was not easy to see. You can only see such ideas if you really look carefully for unexpected resources, intermediate moves, and things like that. Let's continue. I wanted to show you one example also where mate is involved. So far we haven't talked so much about that, but sometimes when we're defending, we can use tricks based on the opponent's king. So that's what we have in this example. Another very complex example. We're playing with the black pieces. It's a French defense. Zarubitsky with white and Nikitenko playing with the black pieces. Zarubitsky sacrificed the exchange to get this nice attacking position. You can see that black's king is in huge danger here. Rook c1 is coming up next. We shouldn't even think about taking that knight on b3. I know it's hanging, but it would be the end for black because you can see white will invade decisively here in this position. So not easy at all to see a good move here. Please notice sometimes a bad move can lead us to a good move. One of the moves that you would consider here is bishop c6. I know it's a bad move, but I want you to see the point here. If you play this move, you actually enable the threat of mate. You will get mated yourself, but it's important to see this pattern that we could at some moment play bishop c6. So that's what black noticed in the game. They played a very cunning, very smart move here, rook a7, very clever, because now the silly move that I just talked about, bishop c6, it's actually turning into a concrete threat. We would be threatening the white queen, and at the same time, we would be threatening mate. So, but that's just the start of it. Rook a7 is good on general grounds because it also controls the square on c7 in any occasion now. So white played at this point f3 to prevent a mate. Unfortunately, this will lead to other difficulties. We will come to that. The best move here would have been to play knight a5. Difficult to see this move in a game. What black is doing here is that, what white is doing is that they are waiting for black to take, and then they would play here rook c1. And as you can see, this is bad for black because the bishop would fall off again. So black should not move the queen in this case. Well, they should actually move the queen, but in a way that it protects the square on c1. You got it. We should play here queen d2. Yeah, difficult to see this. But okay, it's logical. No, we attack, and at the same time, we defend. White will have to find this move, bishop b4, and now black should just go back with the queen so that it defends everything. If white plays rook c1, now we can play rook c7. So this is not so good for white. They should go back instead, and it's funny, but actually it's hard for black to also deviate because rook c1 is such a strong threat. So this would have been a draw if white had played the move knight a5 here after black's initial very clever move, rook a7. White should have played knight a5, but that's not so easy to see. What about rook c1 then? Well, in this case, black would play their favorite move here again, bishop c6, as we were talking about, attack and defense. Interesting position. I had a look at this. White, since they are being attacked in two different ways, they will have to sacrifice here, rook takes c6, queen takes c6. Unfortunately, after queen takes a7, they won't have time to pick up the other rook because they get mated. Black will simply take, and if you go for the rook, you get mated, if I'm not mistaken. No? So not so easy for white. Queen a7, king d7. And yeah, I was looking if we could bring in the knight somehow, but that doesn't seem possible. And also the king is, yeah, if you go queen a7 check. I was just thinking, what would I play here? Maybe king e6. Yeah, probably I would run away with the king simply because knight c5, we could go king f5. I don't think there are any big dangers here. White's queen is not on the right circuit, you could say. It can't reach the light square. So yeah, black should be able to win this, bringing home the king perhaps at some point. Let's have a look at the game. Rook a7, clever move by black. Bishop c6 is coming up. White played in the game f3, avoiding this trick with bishop c6 that we just talked about. But now black found like another trick here. They played rook b7 first, which means that now indeed we can play bishop c6 next. And we're actually trapping the queen because, as you can see, Now, right now, the rook is undefended, but if you put it here, once you play bishop c6, the rook is defended, and white's queen would not have any safe square. So, clever move. White could give check, but it wouldn't change matters. Here, after bishop c6, the queen is indeed trapped. So, they played in the game knight a5, one move too late. Now, black uses the same idea that we just talked about. Aha, now they play queen d2. Nice move, counterattack. Threatening mate. White doesn't have bishop b4 as in the previous line because black's rook is also there. So rook b1 was played in the game. And I think you can see black's next move here. Last move in the game. What do you think black played? Hint, target white's king, please. That's correct. They played here rook takes b2. Very pretty. Not so much for the pawn, but in order to set up dual mating threats here. Queen takes g2, and if white takes on b2, we will not take the rook, we will instead mate them. So, interesting example. Black seem to be really against the wall here. They seem to be in huge trouble. White seems to be about to break through here with rook c1 and knight c5 and so on. However, this very tricky move, rook a7, definitely saved black's skin, and it even made it possible for them to turn the tables and win this game, because rook a7, it covers c7 and it prepares the tricky move bishop c6. Time for our last example. I wanted to also show you that sometimes we can use these tricks when we are better, when we have an advantage, or we are winning perhaps. Such tricks can be very practical also. And in our last example, you will see how we can use such a trick in a favorable position. I would say one of the strongest players and most interesting players ever from my country, Sweden, is Johnny Hector. I played many games with him. It was always a big suffering. He would always attack me, and he would cook up very interesting tactical solutions and so on. And he loves to play for an attack. But on this occasion, he's actually playing on the other side, so to speak. He's defending in this position. He has a material advantage, but black has some, you could say, feeble threats on the king side. You can see that black's knight on g3, it's preparing to move and attack white's king, some knight move somewhere, knight f1 or something like that, knight f5. So there are multiple ways of continuing here with white in this game. Johnny Hector with white and Frederick Swan with the black pieces. The computer perhaps would recommend a move like g takes f3, or you could think about that move, of course, checking the acceptance of the sacrifice. But I wouldn't advise to play this. No, knight f1 check. The king will go somewhere, let's say to g1 on the dark square, and so that the knight doesn't give check again. And knight takes e3. White is probably winning here, especially if you're a computer. But if you're a human, if we can avoid this, it's better. Now, we will come to these kind of positions later in the chapter about heroic defense. Yeah, I imagine king f2 would be the best move here, maybe. But yeah, who knows? Maybe knight f5. Black will try to give check on h2. White should win, but if we can avoid it, let's avoid it, right? That's, I don't know, the time situation here, it's the move 34. Imagine you're down to 2 minutes and you want to have like an easy ride. Look for something else, look for a tactical trick. That's what Johnny Hector did. He saw a very nice trick. It's, yeah, what is it based on? It's based on maybe black's relative vulnerability on the 8th rank, you could say. If you could move away black's queen from the 8th rank, it would let white give check. When white gives check, the black king will come to g7. Where would you like to have white's queen then in that position? What do you think? Favorite square for white's queen when black's king is on g7? That's perhaps what Johnny Hector thought, or he simply saw this like that. It's possible, no? In any case, very nice move. Bishop f4. Beautiful trick, very simple, very useful. After queen takes f4, you can see the point here, of course. We can bring the queen to this square, where it will attack both the king and the black minor pieces. So queen c8 check, king g7, and queen c3 check. No matter how black reacts here, we will take back on f3 with the queen. It's nice to have the queen so close to the king also. After f6, queen takes f3. Black tried the last little trick here. They played knight f1, and after king g1, they played queen h2 check. And again, I think maybe you can win this if you take and you play that queen endgame, but what Johnny Hector played, of course, much smarter. He played here king f2, so that we don't give black a chance to take that rook on a1. So here, I think black played on it for a few more moves, but they're completely lost in this position. You can see that they can't really bring out the knight in a good way. Yeah, maybe they can play knight e2. We should just make sure not to go for or queen g3. That would be a bit comical. I think you can play something else here. Queen. Yeah, where would we put the queen? We should avoid queen f4. Maybe there is a check also, but I think I would play something like queen. Sorry, something like queen e3 maybe. In my perfect world here, I would hope that they play knight c4 and then I would play queen g3. This would be my approach here, just trade queens, and I don't care about pawn falling off or things like that. So in any case, I'm not really sure what happened in the end, but yeah, definitely white is winning in this position. So very simple, very effective trick. It doesn't really win anything, it just makes white's task easier by trading pieces. Bishop f4, so that after queen takes f4, we are ready to trade off the pieces here, queen takes f4. And we also bring our distant queen a little closer to the kingside by queen c3, and we take on f3. So nice trick by white in this case. We can see that we can use tricks also in favorable positions. I mean, we are still defending, but objectively we have a big advantage, like we're trying to neutralize our opponent's last desperate attack or something like that. Let's have a very quick recap. Let's see all the examples that we saw here. Let's see. Oh, I jumped wrong. Here we are. First example, Meshkovsk noticed white's back rank vulnerability, played here rook a1, relying on the trick after rook takes, king h2, rook h1. Very nice trick, so that we could pick up the pawn on c6, take on d7, thereby equalizing the game. We saw how Dragon spotted the motive of a tactical the motive of a tactical possibility along the 5th rank. If both bishops end up on that rank, we can attack them with a rook. So he played here the move rook c8, and after, if white had taken on e5, his idea was to take, and in the very end play here rook c5, the motive of the undefended piece also, you could say. Christopher Yu used a nice knight fork here after queen h8, I was going to say, but that's a bad move because black would play king h7. Yeah, move orders matter. No, let's start with a knight, and after king e7, queen f6 check, he was ready after king d7 to take on f6 and give check and pick up the queen, and then he was material up, and not only that, he had managed to avoid black's attack. We saw Vidit's difficult position here, which had only one possibility for defense. This was really a situation. It was difficult to see black's best move because it's anti-intuitive, you would say. c5 looks like a losing move, but it's actually very strong because of the knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes, queen f7. In the end, black can pick up the bishop on b2, undefended bishop. Let's continue. This position didn't occur in the game, Grishuk Aronian. I was curious about it. Why didn't Grishuk enter this? It looks so promising, but I learned something here, that if black takes on e4 and white takes back and white plays queen d5, it's not like black is lost here, not at all. It's quite the opposite. Bishop e7, a very clever move, giving up a bishop to save the rook and the knight, so that after queen takes, we can go c6, and later on we can try to trap that queen on b7. We saw in the most crazy example here in this little collection, we saw how black could end up in this position coming from that position. This was really difficult to see, hanging queens and things like that. But okay, we're talking about tactical motives, right? The motive that we had to notice here was that we could the motive of the two knights on the same file, similar to the Dragon example where the two bishops were on the same rank, right? It's a little the same geometrical picture. So queen takes, pawn takes, rook d8, as sometimes happens. One of the sides cannot keep a material advantage. They have some tactical issues here with knight f8 coming up next, and also black has some move like d3 in the pocket. In the next example, Hakobian found this beautiful tactical move, rook c8. When people say tactics, it's about giving mate and winning material. I would like them to see this example. White didn't win anything, but they saved their skin and they even went on to win the game. Rook c8, beautiful move. There was nothing on c8. There wasn't a bishop on c8. There was absolutely nothing. He played here rook c8 with a simple point that if rook takes c8, we take on d4, and we take on f3, and our king is feeling much safer now after that little tactical operation. We saw in Musard Romanov how another very interesting example, how white didn't see any ghosts. They played knight f3, not afraid of any discovered attacks here, knight b3, knight a4. That was the key variation. White is relying on the small, geometrically speaking, discovered attack, so that we can pick up the knight next turn with the queen, which was under an attack. So nice idea by Musard in this game. We saw how Friedman went a little too far in his winning attempts. Queen a4 was very well intended. Unfortunately, black saw this smart tactical rejoinder, b5. Yeah, that's the kind of move that I like. b5, unexpected tactical trick. Nobody expected this move. And after queen takes b5, c6, black won material since white lost time. Their queen is not attacking the rook on d7 anymore. We saw this very nice move, rook a7, prophylactic fashion, rook a7 here, covering c7, but also creating a diabolic trick with bishop c6, which black actually didn't use in the game, but still it was present in some of the variations. And also it was a good defensive move in general, because we are taking control of this crucial square on c7. Finally, we saw how we can use this technique of tricks also in superior positions. Here we're about basically trying to find a way to finish the game, and that's what Jonny Hector did here by playing bishop f4, giving away the bishop but just for a short while, because he saw this nice motive of taking back and winning the game rather effortlessly. All right, thanks, and see you in the next chapter.